Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our Fireside Chat. You'll see I've got a background today. I've never had a background before. I finally got a background. I'm your host, Tyler Simons, head of customer success at Fullcast, and we are a go-to-market planning and execution platform. Today's guest is Jaclyn Balben, VP of Operations at Bamboo Health. Jaclyn, why don't you give us a brief intro?
Sure. So I head up operations for Bamboo Health. We are a software solution in the healthcare space, really focused on revolutionizing care collaboration for the improvement of whole person care. And within the operations space at Bamboo Health, that encompasses a couple of different functions. One of those is revenue operations. So, my sort of career background comes up through revenue operations. So it's an area that I've spent a lot of time in over my career and within Bamboo Health, but also includes our delivery function. So, implementing our solutions for customers to ensure that they're getting the best possible outcomes when using our products and services, as well as our customer support organization. So a couple of different functions within operations. But one thing that's really exciting is sort of using the same sorts of frameworks and models within all of the different departments to drive, scalable and effective outcomes within the organization to drive, the best possible solutions, whether that's for external customers or internal customers within the business.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk a little bit about multiple products and how those play into our go-to-market. I think a lot of people may or may not have actually, maybe not have spent a ton of time with multiple products and haven't really thought about it because it's just always like collapsed into one. And we're going to look at a bunch of these different scenarios and how you might want to think about it. Right. And going back to the frameworks piece, hopefully we'll come out of something with that. But why don't we just like jump in and we'll like start with a nice broad picture like we always do, which is like, how can multiple products actually affect our GTM, or like how should we think about that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's first important to be clear on is that multiple products does not mean different features and functions off of a same core product. When I think about multiple products, it's really is your ICP changing? So, is that ideal customer profile changing, or is the buyer of your product changing because you have multiple products, right? Because when you have those really fundamental shifts in who you might be speaking to or what sort of, customer you're targeting, then everything in your go-to-market motion is likely changing. Go ahead.
So quick example on that would be like thinking about the Salesforce product line, because I think everybody knows what that is.
Yeah, it's a good example.
Like Sales Cloud product, but maybe like Salesforce, like I think it's like Inbox or Salesforce Maps. It's kind of it's another product, but it's kind of still the same ICP.
Exactly.
Whereas if you go into like Marketing Cloud, Pardot area, that's like a wholly different ICP, and therefore that's kind of what we're talking about, is these two separate worlds that exist.
And right. So that's a great example that's going to, probably resonate with a lot of people where, for a lot of people, actually, that are listening to this, they're likely a Salesforce buyer or are in that continuum, and, but probably within the Sales Cloud, right? So yeah, if there's Inbox, if there's, any sort of upsell, like Salesforce Maps, like these add-ons that are a part of the Salesforce Sales Cloud, it's the same, buyer, it's the same ICP. A lot of things are the same, but there's different product functions or add-ons, that are upsells to that core product. And in that case, it adds complexity, but it's not the same as adding in Marketing Cloud or Service Cloud or those other clouds where you're now looking at a completely different go-to-market motion. Your materials are different, your pitch is different, your price points are different, your ideal customer profiles, like all of those things are going to change. And that is where the complexity really starts to come in, because it means, all of those functions that you're likely running within, a planning organization or a planning process are going to be duplicated multiple times over, and not in a copy paste type way. it's going to be, we have this team doing this thing. Now we have this completely other team doing this thing. And so, maybe we want to have a lot of the same outcomes where it's booking plans and, TAMs and quotas and all of the different components, but with totally different inputs. And so, the ability of teams to be able to really split out all of the different factors that go into each individual go-to-market motion for those different products gets a lot harder. And when you start thinking about it, and something that we've sometimes contended with is, well, we have a sales, what should our ratio be of, revenue operations to our sales team? And it's like, well, that ratio doesn't hold true when we have multiple go-to-market motions. If we had 40 people selling the exact same thing, we need a lot fewer people in revenue operations. But if we're effectively running multiple different business lines, we need a lot more people because they're doing those same jobs over and over and over again in completely distinct motions, similar to the distinct go-to-market motions versus, doing the same motion for a larger group. And I think that that's one of the things that when it comes to effectively bringing a product to market, it's very few times does a company miss the marketing strategy or the pitch strategy or how do we actually determine why we're doing what we're doing, but then on the downstream, how do we take that strategy and translate it into operational effectiveness? That starts to be a place where I think people need to get earlier in the cycle, particularly revenue operations teams, getting earlier in the cycle to say, we really need to be at the forefront of this planning so that we're able to cascade it effectively throughout the revenue organization in order to drive great outcomes. There's nothing that distracts a sales team more than having a new product to sell, but not having clear territories or not having a good compensation plan in order to incent the right outcomes. All of those types of things need to really be worked out early on in order to be effective.
Do you feel like it, and maybe this is too detailed, I don't know, but do you feel like having multiple products, and again, multiple products, we're talking about these like ICPs, I'm just going to say multiple products. Right. We all know that it's like Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, so on and so forth. So do you feel like multiple products could actually, I guess really what I'm getting at is like, when is there like a point where you feel that, the teams need to start thinking about things differently rather than just trying to lump it all into like one single go-to-market, right? Like you're just like, everybody's going to be aligned to the same thing. The same salespeople are going to try and sell all these products. Is there like this point where you feel like, well, we need to get involved early? The revenue operations teams need to actually start to think about wholly different go-to-markets. Is there like a point in that? Is that like when you roll this product out, or is there like some kind of signal that says it after the product's been available?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer on what that sort of trigger point is. I'd love to have one. But I don't think I've got a great answer there. I do think though, it's why the engagement early is important. Because there is going to be an inclination if you're late to the party to just say, let's try to make this as much like everything else as we can because we have a framework for that. And that's the reactionary answer. The proactive answer when you're early is, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Why is this different? Why would we take this approach? How do we think about defining success? What are those right outcomes? And starting with the right questions in order to drive the process versus being handed effectively a problem to solve for, which then, for people who probably have already had a to-do list that was, full and complete, the answer is going to be, let me try to make this as sort of minimal a impact to that to-do list as I can. So I don't know that I have the great trigger point. It's a good question to think about, but I do think it's the being read in early and often and understanding, from, a product marketing perspective or a general go-to-market strategy perspective, sort of how do we think about these different motions that the downstream teams need to account for, and being part of those conversations so that, if you have great leadership and you have the right people in the conversation, they can say this feels like that moment when we need to start actioning on it. And maybe it is when we're starting to I was going to say enablement, but that's too late. It's way earlier than that. So it's a good question, Tyler.
I think, by the way, when we talk about early, we're talking about you should be in conversations right now for next year.
Yes.
Like what we see on our end is, the planning stuff starts. We're going to say our fiscal year is January 1.
Yep.
You can shift things around based on that. But like planning should start in October timeframe. That's like carving books and stuff like that, not planning for other like headcount and doing your capacity plan and all that other stuff. So if you think about that, working back, you should be in these conversations now talking about what that strategy is going to be for next year. And so if you're not having those conversations right now, you got to figure out where those are happening and get in there, because that's the decision point. Otherwise, you will get the this is what we're going to go do. You go figure it out with whatever you've got. So I think that's something super important to talk about, is when we say early, it means right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think one of the, going back to just, resourcing, one of the challenges people often feel is that it's hard to carve time out to go proactively have the conversations. But if you're not doing that and you're not thinking intentionally about the future, you will never get ahead, right? You'll always be in that reactionary mode. And so how do you set the time aside and ensure that you have the space to have the right conversations? Because we're having conversations about, territory plans and those type, what accounts are we going after and why? What is our future looking, product strategy? All of those types of conversations. And some of it is for now, and some of it is for the future, right? So it's not like these have to be completely separate from each other. One is a planning conversation and one is an execution conversation. We often will combine those, but we're often trying to utilize the time that we have to say, what types of questions should we be asking now that will help inform how we think about, how we'll get better or how we'll plan for next year, or all of, what are the future looking items that we should be, preparing ourselves for, setting that right framework, so that, it's not like this big momentous, like this is a today conversation and this is a tomorrow conversation. We're almost always planning, and we're always thinking in that way, because then it becomes a lot more, manageable. And I think that's one of the challenges with planning, is planning feels so daunting. And it is, if you leave it all to last minute and you leave it all to these huge chunks of work. If you're always planning, it's a lot less daunting.
Yeah, I've spent many weekends doing mini plans. Just like, oh, we got to get this delivered tomorrow.
Right.
What sorts of, I want to talk about these questions that you think people should be asking in the room, right? Like, and maybe it's the always planning thing, but what are the things that people should be thinking through as it relates to these multiple products? Like, what are those questions we should be asking? Is there things lenses that or perspectives that we should have when we're thinking about like multiple go-to-markets and kind of sorting and teasing out that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bunch of the somewhat obvious answers, but then one of the things that I think people often overlook is having somewhat immersive interview processes to understand what's working and not working from those people who are hearing it and in it every single day. So one of the things that we've invested a lot of time and effort into is ensuring that we have the time set aside to ask of every individual rep, and at a certain point, with different scale, that becomes more or less feasible, but making sure that we're hearing directly what is or isn't working, because there's often not a forum to get that feedback unless something is going disastrously wrong, or incredibly well. But there's so much insight to be gained in the middle, and sometimes not even in the middle, but sort of on either spectrum that's just not disastrously or wonderfully. Where we can learn so much from insights from the individuals in the markets and the individuals actually talking to the customers, where it's like, here's this piece of this has been going pretty well and the data looks like it's going pretty well, but we keep hitting this roadblock. Or this we would really be better off if we had this item tweaked. And sometimes it's market knowledge. In this specific area of the country, there's this unique aspect to what's going on in that market that makes this easier or harder. And then from our side, a lot of how we would think about translating that into value is this something that is going to show up other places and is a problem that we should be aware of and plan around, or is this an opportunity that's going to show up in other places that we should try to replicate? And there's when I think about actually engaging and asking the right questions, there's the obvious, like, we should be engaged on a strategic level to understand what our the point of the product is, and how we think about the go-to-market and why that's the go-to-market strategy. But I think the piece that often gets missed is what's the on the ground feedback that maybe doesn't show up in the company slide deck, but is real tangible insight that should potentially show up in a territory plan, or should be accounted for in comp plan, including things like spiffs, to say, oh, there's this really specific thing that we want to replicate because we saw a lot of success with it, so we're going to put an incentive around it to see if we can do that. And a lot of that does not come from just a tops down strategy. It comes from that the sort of feedback from the market and the feedback from the people who are hearing from customers directly, and we've seen success with that.
This isn't the first time that somebody's brought this up on one of these things, and it's listening to the reps and to the market is huge. And I think we found an answer to our original question, which is, if we have one go-to-market, multiple products for whatever reason, let's just say that it exists as a scenario, a good indicator that maybe you need to start thinking about separating out these worlds is from the feedback that you get from the reps, right?
Yeah.
You're in these interviews or these discussions and you're listening to the feedback, you're gonna get clues that, maybe these products should be looked at in different worlds.
Right.
So that's gonna, I think we answered that question.
We can check that off.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that sort of rings a bell for me on is sometimes digging into data, but instead of telling people what the data means, asking people what the data means. And an example of that, we'll see sometimes that different reps who theoretically are supposed to be doing the same things, just in different territories or whatnot, have very different pipelines. And most notably, it will be very different product pipelines. And so asking a rep to say, hey, I noticed that you have a lot more of this product in your pipeline than this other person who's selling this other thing. Why are you selling two different products? And this is more like the sales cloud type example, right? You're both sales cloud reps, but you're selling a ton of CPQ and you're selling a ton of inbox. Like, why? And understanding that, and that also has been a good prompt to pull out different pieces of product knowledge, because in some cases the answer leads us to some of what you're talking about, to say, should we actually be specializing somewhere? Should we actually be peeling things apart? Is there a different problem that is maybe an enablement issue, or a support issue in that market, or a marketing, we could be collaborating with marketing more proactively. So there's all sorts of different outcomes. But an example of an effective rep interview also includes some of that, help me understand the data that I'm seeing from your perspective, and seeing, seeing what outcomes come from those really targeted questions. That's been eye-opening for us, because often the answer is very much something that we would not have anticipated, but
Yeah.
incredibly insightful, that changes how we're thinking about our go-to-market or our strategy, or sometimes even our territory planning, all sorts of different things.
I want to change the topic a little bit and talk about overlays, because I think this kind of like, well, I just want to think about this like this scenario of, I'm still stuck on, the single go-to-market, multiple products thing. And I've seen this a couple of times where there's specialized overlays that are, here's our main go-to-market, and we've got these specialized overlays that really know this secondary product, whatever it is. Let's go back to, we've got our Sales Cloud go-to-market. Yeah. We're now going to feed in these Marketing Cloud overlays, but we're going to push them into the standard go-to-market. Have you seen those scenarios? Have they worked? Is there like a specific, like, this is what it should look like? Or if your if your products are somewhat tied, this works? Like, how should we think about that? And
this is a painful one, because I've seen it a lot. I do not feel like we have a fantastic answer. We definitely, there's been a number of times where we have worked on trying to implement really effective overlays. And I feel like that one of the big challenges with an overlay, and it depends on what angle you're coming from. Sales engineering overlays, I feel like, are pretty straightforward because everyone is generally incented very much along the same lines. When you're talking about someone selling two different products, particularly when there is enough difference to call them two different products in the context that we're using today, but not so much difference that one rep couldn't possibly hang in the conversation, or represent to some degree what it is we're trying to sell. It starts to get complicated, meaning it's more straightforward when there is so much differentiation in the product that one person couldn't possibly represent the other product effectively, because they're just two completely different things. And so it's a very clear, like, the buyer is different, the products are very different. I don't have expertise there. I just need you to come in and sell this thing.
It's also like product complexity, right? Like,
right, totally.
You have a really complex product that maybe requires additional skill set outside of just the normal sales stuff. That might also be a clue that you need some help.
Yeah. And I think the challenge sometimes comes when there's enough difference that the territories don't necessarily, like, the territories are fairly straightforward and need to be carved out, but there's these edge cases or use cases where there are overlaps, and so you put an overlay type concept into place in order to try to facilitate that really effective collaboration between the teams, but that it's not so black and white that everybody is entirely aligned. And this is, we've certainly hit that type of challenge in the past, where in some cases it's really straightforward and we have all the swim lanes really well worked out. No one ever asks, it's clear. Yeah. There are others that every single time it comes up, it's like, remind me how this works. Okay, why does it work that way? And that's when to me, it's like, we don't have a really good why, and the overlay stops making as much sense. So I don't know if this is an area that you've seen. Like, I'd love to hear some of your experiences if you've had it, because this, I think, is one of those, like, I believe very much in effective incentive design, where if everybody has alignment in their incentives, you're going to have a very well running revenue organization, because what's good for every person in the organization is good for those around them. And for us, that's important. We have a network effect business. It's really important for what's good for team A is also good for team B, because they feed into each other, but there's clear roles and responsibilities, so there's not overlap. And in these instances where we have these rubs that are not easy to define, and we have tried to and not been incredibly successful, it really sort of just puts sand in the gears, because it's, everyone's pointed in the right direction except for this one place. And that one place is where you're going to cause churn and thrash and confusion and frustration. And it can really sort of upset so much of the other good work that you've done in other areas. So it's certainly a topic that I could discuss a lot, because I don't think I have a perfect solution for it. And it's really detrimental when you don't have clear incentives.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, I mean, most of the stuff that I've seen's all been along the territory planning side of stuff,
Yeah.
right? Like carving books and where do we put overlays, or is it two separate go-to-markets, et cetera. And I think just in talking with customers, it kind of goes back to our original piece of just hearing how things are working from the sales reps, right? So there are some customers where they've got that single go-to-market and they've got an overlay that specializes in a specific product, and those products are pretty closely related. So they like, it probably is almost more on like the sales cloud and then inbox type of thing, but inbox would be like more complicated than just inbox, right? Like maybe it's CPQ, that's a better example, right? Like, and so you have this specialist that still fits into a very similar ICP in terms of that go-to-market, but CPQ is so in depth and there's so much in there that it's almost a sales cycle in and of itself. So you would have an overlay or a specialist that is kind of aligned with that main AE that runs the account. So the incentive piece becomes easy, but there's no need to like fully break out CPQ into a separate go-to-market, because it's such a good complement to Sales Cloud. So that's kind of what we've seen a lot of. And then the hard part is figuring out from that standpoint on the overlays is just how do we keep the ratios where they need to be, so it's not like one overlay is working with 80 AEs or all of that stuff. So that's kind of the piece there. We are getting close on time, and it's amazing how fast the time goes with these things. I want to let's see if we can get this done. You got 2 minutes to talk about this. So new products, when we're introducing a new product, maybe we know we want to do a new go-to-market, and you and I kind of talked a little bit about like how we estimate TAM for this. And I think this is important because this comes up to the beginning piece of starting to think about how many people do we need to bring into this, what should it look like, what are territories, so on and so forth. So maybe you've got some quick hits on how you start to think about estimating TAM for a product that you've never sold before, you've got no history on. There's nothing. It's a blank slate.
And so I think that for us, we do a TAM SAM SOM type framework. So we might measure a total opportunity with TAM, so total addressable market. But then we actually want to get down to what's obtainable for us, because we do have some network effect type considerations where we actually need to build networks around us in order to bring our product into a different territory or introduce a new product. And so I think a lot of what we would do is start with what are the broad brushstrokes to get to a TAM? And I think we probably use similar frameworks as anybody there. What's a price point that is that we could estimate how would we define some amount of ICP in order to carve out the world. But then we start to try to narrow that down into what is or is not obtainable in some given time frame in order to get to a more realistic target, and then start to pull out how would we then take what's obtainable in that time frame and align it to more of a headcount bottoms up type model to meet in the middle from tops down. What do we think is actually obtainable to bottoms up? What is the headcount plan and the territory plan that we would need in order to service what is obtainable? and then that often brings out a lot of the really specific questions that make up the heart of an effective planning process, where we start to be able to say, here's a bunch of inputs. Now, how do we pressure test and sort of debate all the merits of that approach to get to a place where we actually have, a specific plan of action, and a specific plan to roll out to the business to go execute against.
I feel like this is like, we need to have another one of these because I have a lot of questions. So, but we are about on time. I told you I'd give you a minute to give us your silver bullet, our summary of, what's the key takeaway from today?
I mean, I think the key takeaway is that the value in being proactive outweighs the pain of adding another thing to your to-do list. And that for people that are trying to really run, a best-in-class organization and, be leaders in their teams, carving out the time to think proactively and to drive the execution and the planning process is what will set apart, you from the rest. And that it's hard to do. If it was easy, everyone would do it. But that, the rigor and, the intention that it takes to be at the forefront and be proactive and really lead the charge when it comes to, things like planning is something that I think sets you apart and is the type of muscle and habit that once you get into is easier and easier to replicate and just, pays dividends in the long run.
Yeah. For me, it's listening, right? Like listening to the reps, keying in on those clues that maybe it's time to separate things out if you've got one go to market. I think that was kind of the big win for me when I just clicked in my head. I was like, oh yeah, this is how we do this. So Jaclyn, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we have to have you back on because we teased Tam Sam Som, and I think I was like, oh my gosh, this is another 30-minute conversation. So maybe we'll have you back on soon enough. So yeah, thank you for joining us today. Happy Friday and happy weekend to everybody. And until next time.
It was great. Thanks for taking the time, Tyler.
Yep. See ya.
Bye.